This program is made possible in part by a grant from Humanities, Texas, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities.
I mentioned to you all that I am a third generation El Pasoan, and when I was looking at the card they sent out, it made me a little embarrassed, but it said, you know, what did I title it? Coming home. The mission of Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe and what it means to me. And I thought, no academic would ever say that. It sounds so sentimental. But I'm sorry, I can't help but be a little sentimental about the church in Juarez because it really helped me come home. I had studied abroad and studied at Vanderbilt University undergraduate. I grew up in El Paso, went to elementary school here, went to high school here, went off to Vanderbilt, studied art history. My dad wanted me to be a mathematician. When I switched to art history, he just knew I'd never have a job. And he wanted me to be self-sufficient, but really this mission, I'm going to kind of tell you the story. And I wrote it down because I'm prone to wander. The closer I get to 60, I'm prone to wander. So I thought in deference to you all, and so there can be questions when I think you can really get the best input. I'd love to answer questions at the end. But I kind of wrote things down and will show you slides. And you can interrupt me if you want to. It's not real formal. But so I invite you to do that. Is this dark enough so you can see it? Andrew, what's good for you?
This works.
Okay. That level? Right, that's perfect. Is that good for you all? The mission of Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe, a whitewashed adobe built in 1668 and now nestled beside a 20th century cathedral in downtown Ciudad Juarez, opened my eyes to the rich history of El Paso and the possibilities of returning home. Its facade is so simple that passersby can miss it altogether. How do I do this, Barbara? Will you do it for me? But those who walk through its wooden doors and look up at its elaborately carved ceiling can be inspired like I was when seeing it for the first time nearly 30 years ago. The next one's blank. But as a native who attended public schools in El Paso, I was ready to leave home and explore the world, studying art history at Vanderbilt University with a semester abroad in Florence. My time in Italy opened my eyes to the great achievements of civilization and broadened my world. But when I married my Vanderbilt sweetheart and returned to El Paso, I felt somewhat disappointed and sad. Though happy to be with Dee and begin a family near my mom and dad, all I had learned to love culturally was in Europe, I thought. And there was nothing much of it that interested me here at home. You know, now looking back now, I thought, what was I thinking? I didn't think about the great art lessons I took at the El Paso Museum of Art, in the old Turney home on Montana, which is now the International Museum of Art, built by a wonderful architect named Trost. I didn't think about that, nor of the European masters that I saw there. Somehow, I'd forgotten meeting Botticelli, Canaletto, and the great Renaissance women painters, Artemisia Gentileschi and Lavinia Fontana, in the El Paso Crest Collection rooms at the museum, only a few blocks from Old Mount Franklin. When they built the Crest building downtown, it's still there. It's a beautiful Pueblo Deco building. It's empty now and in bad condition. Billy Abraham owns it. We're all hacked at him. But anyway, when they built that building, the Crest, the contractor, R.E. McKee, that built buildings all over the world, they did the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. He befriended Rush Crest. And El Paso ended up with part of the Crest collection, which founded the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. But they just broke it up and distributed it all across the United States to smaller communities. And El Paso got a beautiful sampling of that collection, including, they probably weren't as considered as highly then, but these women Renaissance painters. Fortunately, I decided to attend New Mexico State University, where Harvard, just up the road for you newcomers, 45 miles to the north in Las Cruces, where a Harvard-educated Italian Renaissance scholar named Christiane Juscoget became my teacher. She had me do papers on the Crest collection paintings I'd forgotten about and invited me to help search for Italian paintings in historic New Mexico churches. She also invited scholars from Italy whom I befriended, including an architectural historian who mentioned Italian documents on the Franciscans in the southwestern United States found in the library at the University of Padua, where he taught, the second oldest university in Italy. The Franciscan order, of course, was founded by St. Francis of Assisi, Italy, the Catholic friar who became known as the patron saint of animals and the environment. We all love St. Francis. And it was they, the Franciscans, who came through El Paso with the Spanish, traveling along the Camino Real through El Paso to Santa Fe. The church and state going hand in hand, conquering lands while winning the souls of Indians. This is a book cover. Texas Western Press was started at UTEP. It was started by a book designer named Carl Herzog, who became world-renowned for book design. This was the first book they did on the Spanish history of the Southwest. But I love the cover because it's by Jose Cisneros, a Mexican immigrant who moved to El Paso. He died 1 year before his 100th birthday. But he was an illustrator who, by the time he died, had illustrated over 300 books on the Spanish Southwest. When my sons studied in Spain, everybody knew about Jose Cisneros. But Jose Cisneros was primarily a bus painter. He never was able to get an education. He primarily cleaned buses and painted buses. And Tom Leas, an artist here, really kind of helped introduce him around and gave him his start. But after working all day, he would come home and draw in the basement of his home and became world renowned. Going back to my Italian art historian, his name was Leonello Pupi. And he came back after visiting New Mexico State. He came back and lectured again. And I took him on a tour of the missions in El Paso along the Mission Trail one Saturday. And he asked me a question that gave me direction. And that was, have you thought about doing your master's thesis on the 17th century Franciscan mission architecture in New Mexico? Now, at first I thought, well, great, yeah, I'll go to Italy. But I was pregnant at the time, I had a husband, I had a life here. But it intrigued me, his question, and an Italian asking me, I paid attention. But of course, what I found, the next one, was that a shining example of this mission architecture was the mission of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe in Ciudad Juarez, less than 5 miles from my home. That was the beginning of the scales falling from my eyes as I deepened my awareness of home. Every week I crossed over to Juarez, meeting the priest, his name was Father Isidro Payan, who pulled out extension ladders and anything I needed to explore and photograph every detail of the church. I met beggars who were there on the steps every visit. I listened to their stories. I heard prayers and music and experienced masses and weddings. Descending an extension ladder from the choir loft, one time where I'd been taking pictures up above, I found myself beside a wooden casket and the beginnings of a funeral down in the nave below. Not only did I get to know the structure and the decoration of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, but more importantly, I came to know something of its meaning for the people of our region. It was moving to realize that the mission had served the region since 1668, never closing its doors, It's set for a short period of restoration in the 20th century. It was a living, breathing church, not a shrine to the past. Sometimes it's hard to value or to recognize value when we don't pay admission or receive a brochure. And entering Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe and quietly walking towards its high altar doesn't cost a thing. Its adobe walls, I learned, were whitewashed, you can go to the next one, with lime and spaced at the proper distance to allow a span of ponderosa pine trees to form the ceiling. You can go to the next one, which is, you can kind of see how they built the church. The trees had been tree ring dated to a grove in the Oregon Mountains up near Las Cruces, where I went to school, 50 miles north. The Manso Indians, for whom the mission was built, were not a settled tribe like the Pueblo people to the north near Santa Fe, the capital, which was the capital of mission activity for Spain. Here they were more nomadic, hunter-gatherers with little agriculture. It would have been they who cut the trees down, dragging them to the Rio Grande. We'll go back, Arturo. Dragging them to the Rio Grande, where they would be bound into rafts and floated down to Paso del Norte, where Fray Garcia de San Francisco would have acted as the architect. This is an old map that I actually sold in my gallery that Tom Leas did when he was homesick. He went to the Art Institute of Chicago. And when he was up there, he'd do like maps of the old Indian pueblos in New Mexico. This is an old map. Of course, here's the Rio Grande going up towards Santa Fe, but you see where all the Indian tribes were located. Here's a more modern map, but you can see Las Cruces and how that's how they had to get those beams weigh about 800 pounds apiece at least. And they would have to drag them down and to have floated them down the river to the Pass of the North. You can go to the next one, Arturo. This is an illustration. Tom Leas did a book. Actually, you can see all the illustrations in the public library if you just walk right next door in their border heritage area. But this is an illustration he did of the first building, because the mission was the first building at the Pass of the North. And here you have Fray Garcia de San Francisco, who would have acted as the architect. An interesting thing to me, Tom Leas would not have known this, but the bell tower was added 150 years later. So they would not have been constructing the bell tower at the same time. If you'll go to the next one. This, you all know this sculpture? Have you all walked around downtown? Of course, John Hauser picked up on the whole notion of the 12 travelers. Tom Leas, doing the first builder, he wanted to do them in 3 dimensions as sculptures. And so it's so nice right out in Pioneer Plaza, just right here where we are, that you have a sculpture of Fray Garcia de San Francisco. This is what the ceiling looks like. Looking at the ceiling beneath the choir loft, you can go, I think you skipped one, Arturo, let's see. Or I'm missing it. I'm missing it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Keep going, because I want to see. I know I have it in here somewhere. I'm going to. It disappeared. Okay, go back. I told you the punchline. I hope you didn't pay too much attention. But looking at the ceiling beneath the choir loft, I saw how beautiful the deeply carved vigas, the beams were, decorated with a Moorish design of rosettes like a sunflower within diamond-shaped borders. Under the choir loft, it's the picture that I'm missing. There are rough-hewn boards placed between the beams to support the weight of the choir. But above the nave, which is the single aisle going down to the front, the ceiling rises high overhead. Yeah, there it is. You can pass it. We'll pass it around so you can see how they would have changed the construction under the choir loft to support the weight of a little organ and the choir up overhead. But high overhead, there are cottonwood branches that are laid between the vigas in a herringbone fashion for a much more decorative effect. The molding supporting the ceiling is a Franciscan rope, which you will see in the picture that we're passing around. It's right beneath the corbels, but there's a Franciscan rope motif that was mimicking the ropes that the Franciscans would tie around their brown habits. And the doors, although those at the rear, these are from my thesis, so it's hard to see them. But although those at the rear no longer open to a baptistry, they were removed to make room for a widening street. Its carved design was beautiful and deep. You can see it to the right. You can see the rosette, the same rosette design that you find on the ceiling, repeating the patterns of the ceiling. Father Payan told me, you're from the Middle East. I cannot remember the place he saw. Of course, this was influenced by the Moors. And he said that there was a church in the Middle East somewhere where he saw a patterns very, very similar to the ones that you see at Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe. At the front of the church, there's a sacristy too, with sacristy doors that open up onto a small room that are equally beautifully, and the ceiling is the same as it is in the church. There was a fascinating blending of cultures, the materials of the Indians in adobe and wood, with the cross-shaped design of the Europeans. What you're looking at here is the nave, as you're going to single aisle nave. It's built like a cross, like so many European churches, built like a cross. So you have a single aisle going down to the front, and then the transept, the T, the cross at the top, is about 10 feet higher than the nave. So whereas in European or in Mexican churches down south in Mexico City, you would have a dome. Normally you have a dome. If you go to the next one, I think you can see it, Arturo, where you would usually have a dome, and you know the light that you get in a dome, you get this celestial light. You can sense the angels coming down from heaven when you're standing under a dome. Well, here, with a real economy of means, really using the architecture of the indigenous people, they just left a clear story window where it's about 10 feet higher. And the church, what direction do you think it faces? It faces east. It faces east. Their masses would have been in the morning. So in the sun coming up in the east, the light would come straight down through that clear story light window onto the high altar. You can go to the next one. You can go back. I think you get a sense. So whereas the nave remains kind of in shadow, there's this beautiful light at the front of the church. There was equal simplicity, we'll go on, Arturo, in the decoration of the walls. A painted design rather than glazed tiles that are often found in the churches of Mexico. And whereas they did have caravans that traveled up here, bringing all kinds of materials and decorations, there were not artisans trained in majolica traditions from Spain close by. So this was really a much more practical approach. When the fresco wainscot was restored in the 1960s, its design was noted by the restorers as having notable calidad estética y fuerte sabor indígena por sus elementos decorativos y brillante colorido. So they were beautifully, brilliantly painted and had the flavor of the indigenous people using natural dyes. Over the course of my studies, I learned about Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe's strategic location on the Rio Grande at the Pass of the North, and how Fray Garcia de San Francisco gathered the manzos and the sumas there. I learned how they cultivated vineyards. Here's the very beginnings. We'll go back, Arturo, please. You've cultivated vineyards. There are other pictures that show the quinces, and they were known for their wines in this region. And they had workshops establishing a real presence in our region. And of course, by this, the Spaniards established like an economic fixative in bringing people and keeping them in this very strategic location along the Camino Real on the way to Santa Fe. The center of Spanish governments and mission activity was to the north, but they all passed through the Pass of the North. When the Pueblo Revolt occurred in 1680, we'll go to the next one. This is a mural that's from New Mexico State. It hangs in the Branson Library. In 1680, there was a revolt of the Pueblo Indians that sent everybody fleeing to the south. And they gathered at the mission of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe. It's where they came. This is something very interesting that I had never noticed before, and it's really why I'm so drawn. It's for many reasons I'm drawn to the art of Tom Lee, because he's such an authentic reporter of our history. And just recently, I was doing a mural tour up at New Mexico State, and we were going to several murals. There was one by Ken Barrack, who's a wonderful painter, very beloved teacher up there. But his mural there is sort of a Hollywood version of the Spanish going north and the Indians kind of all cowering on the ground. It's like just to show the power of the Spanish colonization. Tom Leas, someone who had great respect for the indigenous cultures. And when I was lecturing on this, I mean, I couldn't believe I hadn't paid that much attention. But it's called Conquistadors. Of course, it doesn't show this powerful power, the might of Spain going north. In fact, when I was up there, I said, what direction are they coming? And of course, you see, it's not only Spain, but you've got the Indians, of course, with them, which would have been more accurate. They came down together, but they're defeated Spain. So it's called Conquistadors, but they're coming south. You'll notice bandaged heads and things after the Pueblo Revolt. And of course, you see the fighting Indian there as warriors, not as defeated people, but as the warriors. And Tom Lee always depicted them as the warriors and the horsemen they were. He also showed them as the laborers, of course. They would have been the laborers of the mission. Here they're carrying the vigas. But what I love too here in this Versailles detail here, you have the Indian culture, the Quetzalcoatl, you have the flintlock and you have the church with the saint. So Tom Lee blending all the cultures together in this mural that hangs up at New Mexico State University. But when the Pueblo Revolt occurred, of course, they all came down. And where's the map? Arturo, if we'll go back to the map. The one that had, I'll just tell you, of course, in Santa Fe, so they're all coming south. Of course, in New Mexico, there's an Isleta. In New Mexico, there's a Socorro. That was Isleta del Norte. And so Socorro del Norte, well, we all know along our mission trail, there's Isleta and there's Socorro, those Isleta and Socorro del Sur. So when they fled down to the mission of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, where they all gathered, it was an important strategic place along the Camino Real, and they all gathered there. But it was then that these different tribes that came down were segregated into their own pueblos down in our part that ended up in Texas. Of course, at the time, it was all the Pass of the North. So the mission of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe is the mother mission of our missions in El Paso. They share not. It shares not only their history. It shares their history in like telling the story of the missions on the El Paso side without mentioning Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe is sort of like talking about children without mentioning their mother. And if you talk about only the mission of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe without mentioning the missions on this side, it's like talking about the mother without her children. And we were mentioning earlier as we gathered here how so often it's kind of hard to piece our history together because you fall into another country, you fall into another language, you fall into another state. And so it's just a little bit more difficult to fit the puzzle together, but when you do, it's really extraordinary. And it also communicates how borders really are the scars of history. Like anything else, Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe has changed since its beginning. We'll go back, Arturo. Getting a facelift at the turn of the century when they built the customs house. They built some other buildings, so they decided they needed to bring the mission up to date. So it got a new facade and pedimented front. This happened in New Mexico a lot, where when friars came and found these, they thought, they just weren't suitable for the glory of God. They were much too modest, so they had to beautify them or make them look a little bit more European. But in the 1960s, it was restored back to its original self, which it is right here. When you saw, a fellow named Felipe Lacouture was the architect when they redid it. And what happened to a lot of these churches up in New Mexico is you saw how they're flat. They have flat roofs. When you're hundreds of years old and you get leaks, well, how do you repair them? With mud. You just fill the leak. And over time, the ceilings would become so heavy that they would collapse. But what they did here at the mission of Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, there's now an I-beam. There are I-beams that are suspended. And it's illustrated in this book that we passed around, done by Miguel Ángel Berumen, where it's now supported. It's not supporting weight at all. So that beautiful ceiling is preserved for all time. When my husband and I, the next one, when Dee and I built a home for the first time in El Paso's Upper Valley, we knew exactly what we wanted. We wanted our home to reflect the first building at the Pass of the North, Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe. The first step was crossing from El Paso to Juarez with a skilled woodcarver named Agustin Castillo to see the carved vigas, corbels, and doors. The last one, Arturo. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it. But as he ran his hand over the deep carving, Agustin understood what he needed to do. Moved by the labor of the Indian carvers, he caught their fever and created his own extraordinary work that we enjoy in our home every day. It's the same rosettes. But the blend of cultures, we'll go to the last one, the blend of cultures that you find at Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe, not in their separateness, but in how they came together into a beautiful home, is something that, a beautiful whole, is something we are reminded of in Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe with its Spanish and its Indian influences. Of course, at the Pass of the North mural, how many of you all have seen this mural in our historic federal courthouse? This is a mural called the Pass of the North, and I bring it up at the end because I took Julia Bussinger there, right after she got to El Paso. After, of course, the Indian, the indigenous people, and the Spanish, there was the Mexican, the mixture of the Indian and the Spaniard, and the Anglo as our founding cultures. But of course, we've added many, many more since then. I mean, people have come here from the Middle East, people have come here from China with the railroads, I mean, from everywhere, you all, from all over the world. But it's wonderful to be reminded of your founding cultures. And Yulia, I took her there, and I didn't even think about this before, but someone from Bulgaria, like Julia is, she's a competitive gymnast, so you know she's going to do a good job. She's going to be better than anybody else. She's going to work hard. But how do you get it? How do you come to a community where if you lose balance, you're in another country or you're in another state, and you've got this blend of cultures here? How do you begin to get it? Well, I took her to the Pass of the North mural that was completed by Tom Leas in 1938. It was part of the WPA program. It was a national competition. He was so happy to win it because it was in his hometown. His father had been mayor of El Paso from 1915 to 1917. But here he represents in all its detail. I mean, he understood the detail. It was sort of like this, but in all its detail, the Spanish barb, and not just the people, but the animals, the types of animals, and the types of equestrian accoutrements of the Spanish. Here's the Indian. Here he chose Apaches. The plants even are the portraits of our sotol, the types of plants that we have. The Spanish, the indigenous, then you've got the Mexican, you've got your Franciscan friar here. He's next to a chadal, of course with his belt that influenced the mission, and then the Anglo. And the inscription above is, "O Pass of the North, now the old giants are gone. We little men live where heroes once walked the inviolate earth." And Julia, when she saw it, she said, this is exactly how she was. She goes, "Viva Bacon, the giants of El Paso history." And that's what she's been doing ever since. Starting with Don Haskins, our famous basketball coach, and Fair Manufacturing, which is Middle Eastern descent, but someone who started a manufacturing company, Fair, which invented the leisure suit and permapress. And you can forget things like that over time. But I think really the road forward, the way we move forward, is enlivening what's always been here for a greater future. So I thank you all very much for listening to me, and I'd love to answer questions if you have it about the church. Y'all have any questions?
Covered it well.
Good. Well, anyway, I hope it's a personal story for me. And anyway, we are going to do a tour. The Tom Leas Institute, I had an art gallery for 25 years, and I closed it in 2010 because to communicate our history in our region, of course, every artist contributes so much. But if you had to choose one, and even Jose Cisneros, even relationships here, do you all mind if I when Tom Leas was working on this mural in 1938, there was this artist named Jose Cisneros who worked in the White House department store doing window dressing. He'd come up from Mexico during the Revolution, his family having lost everything. He would watch. Of course, when you're from a community and there's an artist painting something like this, people pay attention. And Jose used to go watch him and never open his mouth because he said his English was so primitive. But one time he gathered courage to interrupt Tom Leas at his work. Tom Leas got down off the scaffolding, looked at his drawing, said it was great, he was representing his own culture, and wrote a note to the librarian, Maud Derlin Sullivan, which she gave him his first exhibit, and he was like on his way. At the end of his life, Jose, there was a book done on him by someone at UTEP, a fellow he was a folklorist named John West. And Jose sent Tom Leas a book, and he inscribed it to him, and he said, "It's all because of you." But I saw the note that Tom Leas wrote back to him, and he said, "No, it's not. It's because of you. It's because of your own will and your own desire." And so that story of what happened here at this mural, it's important historically for what you see, the images, but it's also important for the stories of what happened there. And that's just one of many. So anyway, thank you very much for your attention. Yes?
I guess, how true is the story of the first Thanksgiving?
You know, Barbara's better to answer that. You know, Sheldon Hall did a lot of research on that, on the first Thanksgiving. And, you know, they've documented that they did participate with the Indians. And I think we need to just get on board and not, you know, it doesn't really, I mean, it's just like they went and kidnapped Sheldon Hall, who founded, when I was little, he taught me how to drive. So I really was always indebted to Sheldon Hall. But, you know, it's just like we want all of that. We don't have to quibble about that. They did have Thanksgiving. There was a Toma. There's Jody Schwartz. You can talk about that better, Jody. Here's Jody Schwartz. She started, Jody Schwartz, John Hauser, who's Fry Garcia you saw, she's responsible for the Don Juan de Oñate at the airport. She was about to string up the artist because it took so long. But you tell them about the first Thanksgiving.
Well, I'm just getting involved with John Hauser and learning about Oñate. I really just got so excited over the story of Don Juan de Oñate and what his colonizers did. And I have a library of things about it, and it's completely and totally true, this first Thanksgiving. The chronicler on the expedition, Diagra, wrote about exactly what happened here. They had this horrible journey for 4 months across the Chihuahua Desert. They got to El Paso, south of the Rio Grande, were just starving, like horses even drank so much water they would explode. But anyway, these colonists that were walking into the unknown, some of the women had on beautiful dresses and silks. And they were walking into literally the unknown, and so they lived through this experience of crossing the desert, waterless a lot of time. And so when they came to the river banks, it was a cause for great joy. And they did have a celebration, and the men caught fish and shot geese, and they had a mass. And I'm almost sure that the Indians were also included because they helped bring them up to the river. The Manzo Indians took them further upriver to where they could cross eventually a few days later. So it's all chronicled. And so to say that it's not true is just infuriating because it's true.
Right.
And we should be very
Right.
proud.
And the fact of the matter, it contributes to American history. When I chaired the President's Committee on the Arts and the Humanities for 8 years, and when I brought Bruce Cole here, a scholar from Indiana, headed the National Endowment for the Humanities, he was so excited because he says, this is history I know nothing about. So it's interesting. Actually, now at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, as you enter it, they've rehung it, where you have Great Britain and the art that descended from that, and then on the other, it's like opposing empires. And then you have Spanish on the other side, and Santa Fe, a lot of those artists. But you know, it's very interesting. We're glad we went the way we did, but it's interesting to know that there were competing empires.
Yeah, I don't think children, we didn't learn about that as children.
Mm-mm.
The colonization of this part of our world, and we should be so proud. And it was before the first one. It really was, like 21 years before. So anyway, it's the truth.
It is. Go ahead.
When we did the Wall of Giants on the missions, which was the reason why this lecture series, we did a timeline on all the missions that were in this area. And one of the things that hit me was your area of occupation was between Guadalupe Mission and an area that they called La Toma. So that place where the territory was claimed for Spain, where they had this celebration, where they had the play, where they had the music, whatever, remained in Spanish memories. And so your known area along our valley was between that place and the ford where they crossed up here between Juarez and El Paso.
The Paso of the North, yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. Please, Milo.
Maybe everybody already knows this, but they go south to San Antonio to make more missions, or did they cross the river further south?
Those are later missions. Barbara, you're probably better to answer that.
70 years or something like that later.
Right, and those aren't Franciscan missions. I don't think they are are they in San Antonio?
Okay, one of the ironies that we have to keep remembering is there were missions in New Mexico before Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe.
Right.
We were kind of the backwash from the Oñate colony. But I do remember reading about there was a delegation of Native Americans from the Big Bend country that came up asking for missionaries to come to their area. So we're more tied to missions in the Presidio area and that movement than we are to the interior of Texas. That was it. Part of that was that developed along a totally different community route.
Right.
And was tied to the progress through there.
They're much later. I just visited them. They just became part of Save America's Treasures, or they're on the UNESCO World Heritage Site. They're part of the National Park Service now. Ours are earlier than San Antonio. Theirs are beautifully preserved. And ours were washed away. The ones on our side, they're not the original structures. They had been rebuilt because the Rio Grande flooded.
And one of the things that's interesting, Socorro, one of the, either the first Socorro mission or one of the earlier, because I lose track of how many times the churches were rebuilt, there was an archaeological dig there, and they came up with some pattern, painted wood, and my poor memory of the illustrations from what they found resembles what you were showing in one of the missions.
It's a beautiful, that ceiling is just, it's really extraordinary. It's really worth seeing it. But we will be doing a walking tour. What's the date, Arturo?
February the 20th.
On February the 20th, the Tom Leas Institute is going to be doing, it's going to be limited to 12 people. We'll be walking over and seeing the mission. It's time to go back. It's for many years we didn't go because of the violence, but things are so much better in Juarez now that, I'm ready to go back. Yes?
So, I guess I messed up. Which is older, the California missions or our missions?
Ours, the mission of Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe, was founded in I don't know the dates, 1659 is when it was founded. Completed in 1668. So I wish I knew all the dates of all those other missions. But I think most of them are 18th century, the missions. I think the missions in San Antonio are 18th century. Ours are 17th century. So, yes, Jody?
I was late here. Did you mention that the Fray Garcia de San Francisco statue, that's a beam copied from one of the views in the church? Did you say that?
Yes, I showed the Fray Garcia, and he does. It's not an exact copy, but it shows kind of the decoration that you'll find that John did it. But I want you all to take time to look at John Hauser's work. I mentioned that Jody was about to string him up when he did that Oñate. But what we have is a man who, when he was doing this piece, struggling to get it done. I mean, we're in an instantaneous, you fabricate things by machine, done by hand. Jody, he was concerned about the roof of the horse's mouth. And Jody's saying, no one can see the roof of the horse's mouth. And you know what his response? It's like the Greeks. This is what the Greeks said. The gods can see. I mean, so he completed the roof of the horse's mouth, but he's that caliber of artist. And his next sculpture, I had bought the maquette for it, is going to be a Benito Juarez, the greatest president of Mexico. Juarez isn't just named for him, he lived there. Ciudad Juarez was the capital of the Republic of Mexico it was capital of Mexico when he lived there. It would have been when Maximilian was put on the throne in Mexico City. And Abraham Lincoln sent troops down to help fight the French. So they communicated with each other. Back when our chamizal treaty was established with Mexico settling a land dispute of over 100 years. Juarez put a Lincoln statue, and El Paso never put a Benito Juarez statue. So it's way overdue. So we all need to get behind it. Anyway, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Adair.
Thank you.
This program is made possible in part by a grant from Humanities, Texas, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities.